our application, and the first thing we will do is to create domain models. So in the models folder, in the domain models folder, we will create the image domain model. So right click on this folder, add a new class, and let's rename that to image.cs and click on the add button. In here, we want to create a few properties that will represent the table data that we will going to create in our database. So the first property, which is prop double tab, the shortcut, and let's rename that to image.cs and click on the add button. In here, we want to create a few properties that will represent the table data that we will going to create in our database. So the first property, which is prop double tab, the shortcut, is the ID property. So that's a GUID, and the name of the property is ID. After that, we are going to accept the file, the physical file that is going to be uploaded, and that is represented by iForm file, and that's the type of the file that we accept, and the framework has the information file, and that's the type of the file that we accept, and the frame framework has the information about the file in this type of object that we have over here, and that is iForm file. Let's give the name to this property as well. So we can give it a file name, and because we are not going to store this file inside the database, we are going to add an attribute to this, which will be not mapped. So let's add the not mapped attribute to this property, and this comes from system.componentModel.dataAnnotations.schema. And if we hover over it, it says that it denotes that a property or class should be excluded from the database mapping. So when we are going to run our entity framework core migrations, we don't want this property to be included in that. After that, we want a property for a file name. So property of type string, and the name of the property is file name. After that, we want a similar property for file description, and that is going to be an optional property. So I will have a nullable string type over here. The next property will be the file extension. So property of type string, and the name of the property is file extension, and this will hold the extension of the file. For example, if it's a JPEG file, it will be .jpg. If it's a PNG file, it will be .png. And after that, we will have the size of the file in bytes. So a property of type long, and the name of the property is file size in bytes. And finally, we will have the file path, the path to the file, where we can use this path and the clients can directly access the image or the file. So a property of type string, and that will be the name file path. So this is how our domain model would look like, and it's now time to create this domain model and run Entity Framework Core migrations. But before that, we have to make changes to the DB context, and we'll come back in the next lecture and make changes to the DB context and then run Entity Framework Core migrations. In the last lecture, we created the domain model for the image upload functionality, and we have the image domain model. Now it is time to add this domain model inside the DB context so that we can run Entity Framework Core migrations to create a table inside our database. So let's open the data folder first, and inside the nzwalks DB context, we want to add another dbset property of type image. So let's create a new property of type dbset, and that is of type image, and that comes from the domain model folder. We will rename this to images. So the name of the table that gets created inside the database is images. So now that we have made the changes to the DB context, we can now run Entity Framework Core migrations. So for that, let's open Package Manager console. So go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and open Package Manager console. In here, we will run the two commands that are needed to create a migration and then update the database. So first of all, we will run the command add-migration, and inside quotes we can name the migration. So we are adding images table. And then because we have two DB contexts, one for the normal tables and one for the auth tables, we want to specify the context that we want to use as well. So we will say -context, and after space inside double quotes, we will provide the name of the DB context we are going to use. And this will be the nzwalks DB context. So nzwalks DB context, and press enter to run this command. So the command has been executed successfully on this command. Walks DB context, and press enter to run this command. So the command has been executed successfully, and we have created a new migration file, and we want the new images table to be created in this database. So now that we have created the migration, it is now time to update the database by running this migration. So that is the command update-database. And with that, we also want to provide the context because we have two contexts over here. So -context, and after a space inside double quotes, nzwalks DB context, and press enter to run this migration. This migration. Let's check if the migration was successful and we are able to create the table inside the database. I will refresh the database first and expand on the databases, and we want to go to nzvoxdb. Expand on that and expand on tables, and we should see the images table over here. And if I expand on that, we should see all the columns that are needed for this table. So we have the table ready, and if I select on it, we should have no rows at the moment because there's no file that exists in this table. Now that the setup for the images table is complete, we will come back in the next lecture and we'll start working on our images controller. So we will say model state dot add model error. Add model error takes in two input properties. One is the key, and the other one is the error message. So we can say the key is file because the file property is invalid, and then the message is unsupported file extension or something like that. So this will be our first validation, and if the extension is not part of this, right click on the controllers folder, add a new controller. From the left hand side, choose API and select the API controller empty template. Click on the add button, and let's rename this controller to images controller.ca. And click on the add button. In here we get the API controller, and this is pointing to /API/images over here. In here we want to create a new action method for image upload functionality, and because we are uploading an image, we will use the post method over here. So if I put a comment over here, we will use the HTTP post verb, and then this will point to /API/images, and then we want to /point to /API/images, and then we want to /point to /API/images, and then we want 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 to /API/images, up a new action method for image upload functionality, and because we are uploading an image, we will use the post method over here. So if I put a comment over here, we will use the HTTP post verb, and then this will point to /API/images, and then we want to /point to upload. So the route for this method that we are just going to create will be upload. So let's create the structure for this method. So public, and this is going to be an asynchronous method. So async task of type iActionResult. Let's call this method upload, and it'll take a parameter, but we will come to that later on. We will annotate this with the HTTP post verb. So HTTP post, and we also want a route for it. So a route, and inside double quotes we can say this is the upload route. So it will point to API, images, and then upload. Now let's work on the input parameters to this method. We are going to send the file as part of form data, which is similar to body, but it's a different parameter. So this method, we are going to send the file as part of form data, which is similar to body, but it's a different parameter. So in ASP.NET Core we have the from form attribute, so we are going to use this inside square brackets, and then we are going to create a new DTO for our upload method. So let's expand on models, and inside the DTOs folder let's create a new DTO, and let's call this image upload request DTO.cs, and click on the add button. And this is all for separation. So We will create a private method. So private void, and let's say validate file upload. This takes the input request object, so the same as what we have in the controller method. And we are going to validate two things. Basically, we are going to validate the extension of this, and we will have a range of extensions that we are going to validate it against. And the second thing will be the size of this file that is being uploaded. So let's say, for example, if it is more than 10 megabyte of file, then we are stopping the user from uploading it, and we'll give a 400 bad request. So let's add these validations in. We will first create a variable for the allowed extensions. So variable allowed extensions is equal to a new string array, and let's add some values. So let's say we are allowing the JPG, we are allowing the JPEG extension, and finally we are allowing the PNG extensions. Now this list can be totally up to you of which this is JPEG, of which image files or formats you want to accept or not. So this is just an example. You can modify this list as per your need. So now that we have the list, we will check if the allowed extensions dot contains, and we want to check the extension of the file being sent, and we can get that using path, which is a class file in system.io, and it gives us the get extension method. So using this method, we can give the file name which comes from request.file, which is the iForm file dot file name property. So we are getting the extension for the uploaded file from here, and we are checking if it is in this, then it's all good. But if it is not, so we are going to check it against a false. Then I will minimize this. So if it is a false, or you can also say if it is not there, and you can remove this. If it is not part of this list, then we want to throw an error, and we will add the validation error to the model state property. So we will say model state dot add model error. Add model error takes in two input properties. One is the key, and you can remove this. If it is not part of this list, then we want to throw an error, and we will add the validation error to the model state property. So we will say model state dot add model model error. Add model error takes in two input properties. One is the key and the other one is the error message. So we can say the key is file because the file property is invalid, and then the message is unsupported file extension or something like that. So this will be our first validation, and if the extension is not part of this list, we will throw this validation error. After that, we will also check for the size of this file in bytes. So we will say if request.file, because that is the iform file, dot length property, and if you hover over it, length is the byte, and if I hover over this one, we'll say gets the file length in bytes. So we already have that, and we are going to compare it against a long or a number. And let's say we want to check if it's more than, check if it's more than 10 megabyte, then don't allow it. So for 10 megabyte in bytes, it's this number 104,85760. You can just Google it online. 4,85760. You can just Google it online of how to convert 10 or any x megabytes into bytes, and you'll get a number, and then you can compare that number to the length that you want to accept or not accept. So if the length is more than 10 megabytes, then we will throw the validation error. So we will say model state dot add model error, and again the key is file, and the error will be file size more than 10 MB or whatever the file size you are checking against. Please upload a smaller size file. And that's going to be the validation error. So we are checking for two validations, and based on that we have to call this method over here. It will run through this method, and it needs the request object as well. So I will pass the request object. So it will run through this method, and it will add any error to the model state. So now after running this method, we will check for model state dot is valid property. If it is valid, then use repository to upload image, but otherwise return a bad request and pass the model state object to the bad request as well. So this is the controller method that we are going to use, and we have added validations to it as well. If the validations are not met, then we are returning a 400 bad request, but if it is valid, then we are going to create a repository interface and a repository implementation so that we can save the file that was uploaded to the local path and also save these changes to a table. So let's come back in the next lecture and start work on the repository. In the last lecture, we created a new controller, which is the images controller, and that is needed to upload images to our application through the ASP.NET Core Web API. And we have created an upload action method which validates the input first, and if the input is valid, we are going to create a repository which will use this request as part of a domain model and then upload the image and also save the changes to the database. So let's create a repository, but before we can do that, let's also convert this DTO to a domain model, because repositories only deals with domain model. So let's convert DTO to domain model. So we'll say the image domain model is equal to a new image, and make sure image comes from nzbox.api.models.domain folder. So as part of the images, we are going to add value from the request DTO. So let's say the file comes from the request.file, and that is the iForm file, the main file that is being uploaded. After that, we want to have the extension. So file extension comes from this request as well, but it comes from path.getExtension method, and we want the file name which comes from request. So request.file.filename. So it will automatically extract the extension from this file name. After that, we want the size of this file. So file size in bytes comes from request.file.length property. And finally, we have the file name, which comes from the request.file name, because that is a user input. And I think we also have file description, which comes from request.file description. Finally, we have the file path, which will not be covered here, which will be added from the repository instead. So let's not use that, and let's close this to have the image model ready. So the image domain model is ready. We need to pass this image domain model to a repository, but let's create a repository first. Let's expand our Solution Explorer, and inside the repositories folder, I want to create a new interface first. So right click, add a class, and select interface from this list. And let's rename this to image repository.cs. Click on the add button, and we want to create a definition of a method that will have the upload functionality. So the name of the method can be upload, and the upload method takes the image domain model, so image, and that comes from the models.domain model folder. You can call this image, and as a return type, it will return the image domain model. So task of type image domain model. So we have the definition ready. It's now time to work on the implementation of this interface. So expand Solution Explorer, right click on repositories, add a new class, and let's call this the local image Solution Explorer. Right click on repositories, add a new class, and let's call this the local image repository.cs, because we are uploading images to a local solution or a local path and not to any third-party solutions, for example Cloudinary. So in here, this will implement the image repository, and let's create the methods that we want to implement. So control dot on this interface and implement the interface. So we have a structure for the method that we need to implement the interface. So we have a structure for the method that we need to implement. So let's say we want to upload images to a local folder inside the solution. So we can create a folder inside our project over here. So right click on the project, add a new folder, and let's call this the images folder. We can create a folder inside our project over here. So right click on the project, add a new folder, and let's call this the images folder. So once we have the images folder with us, we want to store or upload images into this folder. So we will first want to create a local path variable so that it points to this images folder over here. So I can create a variable called local file path, and we need to get the URL to this file folder, and that we can get from the web hosting environment. So we can inject the web host environment class into this repository. So let's create a constructor for that, and let's inject the web host environment, and that provides the information about the web hosting environment an application is running in. And because we are running this application, we want the path to this folder. And that is, that we are going to get from the web host environment. So let's create the web host environment variable, and then create and assign a private field called web host environment. So in here we can use path.combine, and we can say web host environment dot, we need the content root path in here so that we can, we are able to navigate to this folder. So we have the content root path, but then we want to add the images folder in here because we want to store files inside this folder. So let's say we add the images folder in here, and finally we want to add the file name, which is the local path file name. So it will go to this API location, then the images folder, and then it needs the file information, and that comes from image.filename. So image.filename, and that will be the local file path along with its name. But we also need to provide the extension which isn't part of the name, but it is part of the image domain model. So the final thing we want to add is the image.file extension, and let's bring this down to the second line. So now we have the local file path. We want to open a file stream object so that we can copy this file that we are receiving in form of the iform file and upload this to this location. So I'll say using a variable of stream is equal to new file stream class, and this takes the local file path. So I will provide a local file path which is the string path, and then it needs the file mode, which is file mode dot create, because the file doesn't exist there at the moment. After that, we will use await the image new file stream class, and this takes the local file path. So I will provide a local file path which is the string path, and then it needs the file mode, which is file mode dot create, because the file doesn't exist there at the moment. After that, we will use await the image that we have. So image.file is the actual form file. So image.file, it has the copy to async method, and we are passing the stream to this method. So the line over here reads the file stream for this location over here, and it knows that it has to create this file, and sync method, and we are passing the stream to this method. So the line over here reads the file stream for this location. over here, and it knows that it has to create this file, and we are passing the stream to the method copy to async, which is part of the iForm file method. So using these two lines, we are going to upload the image. So upload image to local path. By the end of this line, we should have an image inside the images folder that we have inside Solution Explorer, inside the API. After that, we want to save the changes to the database, but along with the actual file path of this file. So for example, if the file was uploaded to this location, we actually just can't say that it resides in E drive or some images folder, because this location is meaningless to anybody. It needs to point to a URL of an application that is getting served online. For example, we are running our localhost. That means HTTPS localhost, for example 1234, and then we are pointing to images folder, and let's say we are asking for an image.jpg. then a location like this should be able to serve an image. So because localhost is running, we need to make sure that we are providing a path similar to this to an API or a web service that can provide us with the images. And to get that location, we need to inject the HTTP context accessor, which is able to provide us with the scheme and the URL to our running application. And for that, we need to inject something in the program.cs file. So let's open the program.cs file, and just after we add the controllers, we can use builder.services.add, and we can say HTTP context accessor. So builder.services, so add HTTP context accessor, and we are injecting this inside the services so that we are able to consume it inside our repository. So let's inject this accessor, and we are injecting this inside the services so that we are able to consume it inside our repository. So let's inject this HTTP context accessor inside our repository. Let's give it a name, and then press control dot or control period to create and assign this field. So builder.services. So add HTTP context accessor, and we are injecting this inside the services so that we are able to consume it inside our repository. So let's inject this HTTP context accessor inside our repository. Let's give it a name and then press control dot or control period to create and assign this field. So we have the HTTP context accessor that we can use to create a variable or a path to the image that we just uploaded. So let's create a variable over here, a variable called URL file path is equal to, and we are going to use a variable called URL file path is equal to, and we are going to use we are going to concatenate these strings together to form the scheme and the URL from here, then the images folder and also the file name along with the extension. So from a variable over here, path, a variable called URL file path is equal to, and we are going to use we are going to concatenate these strings together to form the scheme and the URL from here, then the images folder and also the file name along with the extension. So we are going to access or make use of HTTP context accessor to get the scheme first, which we are going to get from HTTP context dot request dot scheme, and that's the scheme whether it is HTTP or HTTPS. After that, we are going to add a colon and then / twice, because that is how the URL is made. And after that, we are going to check the application URL, and that is the host inside the context. So again, HTTP context accessor dot HTTP context dot request dot host, and this will give the host, and after host we are going to get the path base. So again, without any forward slash over here, we are going to use http context accessor dot variable dot http context dot request dot path base, and that's the path that not ends with a trailing slash, so just that. And finally we have a location which looks like the highlighted part over here. So we have the scheme. After that, we variable dot http context dot request dot path base, and that's the path that not ends with a trailing slash, so just that. And finally we have a location which looks like the highlighted part over here. So we have the scheme. After that, we have the host and then the path base. After that, we need a forward slash so that it can go to the images folder. So after that, we want to go to the images folder. So forward slash images, and then forward slash, we want to give the name of the file along with the extension. So again, in curly braces, we will use the image dot file name, and then after that we are going to use in curly braces image dot file extension, and that will be it. So if you see, and that will be it. So if you see, we have the scheme followed by the colon with double forward slash, then the host and the path base, and after that we have the images folder, then we have the file name and the file extension. That is going to be the URL path that we are going to upload to the table and also return it to the user as well. So let's fill the image domain model dot file path property with the file path that we have created now. That's the URL file path, and that's a useful information to anybody who has this information, so they can easily use this file path to get the image from the running application. Now it's all about saving this image information, so they can file path and And that's a useful information to anybody who has this information. So they can easily use this file path to get the image from the running application. Now it's all about saving these changes to the database. So add the image to the images table. And for that, we will use the DB context, which we are going to inject. So let's inject the nz-vox DB context and call it DB context. Press Ctrl dot to create and assign this field. And we can now use await DB context dot images table dot add this new image that we are passing. And finally, we can use the await DB context dot save changes async method. And in the above line, we also have to use the async version of the add method. So add async. So finally, we are uploading the image into the database table as well. So finally, we can return the image back because that is the image domain model that we need to return from this method. With all these changes, now it is time to inject this with all these changes, now it is time to inject this repository and the interface inside the program.cs file so that we can use it inside the controller and then test our application. So inside the program.cs file, if I scroll down to the repositories, I want to inject the image repository, and whenever I ask for the image repository, give me the implementation local image repository. So save that as well. So now we have injected it. We can come inside the controller and can access this image repository through the constructor. So in the constructor, we will inject the image repository, give it a name, and then press Control dot to create and assign this field. Can access local image repository. So save that as well. So now we have injected it. We can come inside image repository, give me the implementation local image repository. So save that as well. So now we have injected it. We can come inside the controller and can access this image repository through the constructor. So in the constructor, we will inject the image repository, give it a name, and then press Control dot to create and assign this field. So now in here, after we have converted the DTO to a domain model, we can say await image repository dot upload method, and that's the only method we have. We will pass the image domain model into this repository method, and as a return we are going to get the information for the created ID as well and the file path. So we can use this and return an OK response once the file is uploaded and return the result back to the user. So it looks like we have created the functionality for the upload method that uploads images into our API. So it's now time to test the solution. So I will run my application. Swagger is running and we can see the images endpoint over here, which has the upload method. So if I expand on that, we can try it out. And it takes three properties at the moment. It takes the file, which is a required attribute, and that's a image upload functionality. It also needs the file name, so we can overwrite the name of the file that we are uploading using our own property, and it can also take the file description, and that's an optional attribute. So let's select a file first. So I'll browse and select a valid file. So I'll select an image from here, then give this a different name. Let's say I'm telling it ASP.NET cover image, and that's a different name from what I have selected. So let's fill the image domain model, and that will be it. Text. So before, and then we some and assign along with the extension. So we are going to access to images folder API location, put this to this location. After that, we will use lines. We this file context accessor. It is http dot variable dot http context dot request dot path base, and that's the part over here. So we have the scheme, after that we have the host, and then the path base. After that we need a / so that it can go to the images folder. So after that we want to go to the images folder, so use, and that will be it. We also need to provide the extension, which isn't part of the name, but it is part of the image domain model. So the final thing we want to add is the image.file extension, and let's bring this down to the second line. So now we have the local file path. We want to open a file stream object so that we can copy this file that we are receiving in and on that, and that's an optional attribute. And we are checking if it is in this invalid test.file, because it void, we need these values property, so and we can give it a property, so I'm call this image from here, then give this a different name. Let's say I'm telling it ASP.NET cover image, and that's a different name from what I have selected. Then as part of file description, I can say this is an image cover for ASP.NET Core MVC. And if I click on execute, it will go to the controller method over here. So I can put a breakpoint and see what's happening. So execute that. It comes back to the controller, where first of all it is going inside the file validation method. So let's see what's happening over there. The file name is coming as ASP.NET MVC.jpg. This path.get extension basically extracts the file extension from this name. So if I press Shift and F9, it takes the .jpg value, and we are checking if this .jpg value is amongst the allowed extensions, which it is, so it will pass through this validation. And the file length is only 166,210, which is much smaller than the 10 megabyte over here. So it passes this validation as well. So our file that we are uploading is valid, and hence we get the is valid property as true. Now we are converting the DTO to a domain model. fix that, and for that let's come to the image repository implementation, and instead of giving it as a comma, I'll stop the application, and instead of giving it as a separate argument to this path.combine, we need to have it as an argument together. So using the dollar symbol and quotes, I will say image.filename tree and the interface inside the program. Want image it, we can the image where fit. So let's see what's happening over there. It's path file extension from this name. So if I press Shift and F9, it takes the .jpg value, and we are checking if this .jpg value is amongst the allowed extensions, which it is. So it will pass through this validation, and the file length is only 160 210, which is much smaller than the 10 megabyte over here. So it passes this validation as well. So our file that we are uploading is valid, and hence we get the is valid property as true. Now we are converting the DTO to a domain model, and we get the file extension, which we already saw, and also the file size, which we already saw as well. So we are just creating a domain model from here and then passing it to the image repository. So let's go inside the image repository. Inside the upload method, we are first creating a local path to a folder which is eDrive, Udemy, NZWorks, API images. The first half of this, which is the highlighted one, is the folder path to the API solution, that the 10 megabyte over here. So it passes this validation as well. So our file that we are uploading is valid, and hence we get the is valid property as true. Now we are converting the DTO to a domain model, and we get the file extension, which we already saw, and also the file size, which we already saw as well. So we are just creating a domain model from here. And then passing it to the image repository. So let's go inside the image repository. Inside the upload method, we are first creating a local path to a folder which is eDrive, Udemy, NZWorks, API images. The first half of this, which is the highlighted one, one is the folder path to the API solution that I have over here. Yours may look something different, but that is the path that I have created this API into. After that, we have the images folder, which is reflected over here. We want the images to reside in this folder. And finally, we have the name of the image that we are uploading and the extension. So using that, we get a local file path, and then we open stream. And there was an error because I think it took me a lot of time to explain and the network was just timed out. So I'll execute it again, but this time I'll remove the breakpoint to see if it actually comes inside the images folder and inside the table. So I'll press continue, and it gave me an error. And it gave me an error because it thinks that there's a / between this name and the extension. So we need to fix that. And for that, let's come to the image repository implementation. And instead of giving it as a comma, I'll stop the application. And instead of giving it as a separate argument to this path.combine, we need to have it as an argument together. So using the dollar symbol and quotes, I will say image.filename and then image.file extension goes together. So I can now get rid of the last argument. And this is the argument together, which means we have the name and then .jpg together. So using that change, I will run the application again. So we will send the values again in the images endpoint. So I'll try it out, select the image, and then give a file name. So let's say this is ASP.NET cover image, and this is optional, so I'll send null at this time. So I click on execute, and this time we get a 200 success response back, which has the image, the ID of this newly created image. We also have the file, and we have the other information as file name, file description, extension, and we also have the actual file image URL, which is really useful to the clients because now that they have uploaded this image, they want to access this image. So let's see if we can take this image as the URL, and if I open a new tab and paste it over here, will I get the image or not? So if I press enter, it says that the image cannot be displayed because it contains errors. Now I know the reason, because it is the ASP.NET Core Web API is not able to serve this image. So in the next lecture, we will see how we can serve static files so that we can use this URL again and we are able to access this image. In the last lecture, we saw that we were able to upload an image. So if I open Solution Explorer, inside the images folder, we have the uploaded image inside our images folder. Folder, and we also were able to add the rows to the images table. So we have the new ID, the name, extension, the size, and the file path to which we are uploading the image to. So if I open the file path inside inside the browser, we were unable to access this image, but that is wrong, right? Because the clients do want to access this image using the file path of the application that it is running inside. But by default, ASP.NET Core is unable to serve static files like images, CSS, HTML. So all that stuff are static files, and ASP.NET Core is unable to serve that by default. So we have to make changes to the program.cs file so that we can serve the static files. So for that, let's come to the program.cs file. And at the end, we have access to a middleware which is called use static files middleware. So after we have authentication authorization, we will inject a new middleware. So app.use static. So after we have authentication authorization, we will inject a new middleware. So app.use static files, and this is the name of the middleware, and it can take the extensions or static file options. So let's create a new static file options object, and inside that we want to provide two things. One is the file provider, which is the physical file provider in our case, and the second thing is the request path. So let's provide the file provider first, is equal to a new physical file provider over here. This takes the root path, and along with this, so we will give the path.combine attribute because we want to point to the images folder that we have over here. So path.combine, we want the directory, so directory dot get, so path.combine, we want the directory, so directory dot get current directory, that we have, and combine that with the images folder that we have, and that's going to be the file provider, and we're going to use the request path, and that'll be /images. So that means whenever we say go to https localhost 1234 /images, then we are being able to redirect to this this physical path over here, which resides inside the API in the images folder. So basically we have a connection from the request path, and it is basically routing us to this physical folder that we have provided over here. So that's the mapping that we have provided. And we are now using static files, and we are serving static files from our API. So with that change, it's now and we are now using static files, and we are serving static files from our API. So with that change, it's now time to test if we are able to access the path that we uploaded the initial image with. So I'll run my application. Once from our API that we have provided, and we are now using static files, and we are serving static files from our API. So with that change, it's now time to test if we are able to access the path that we uploaded the initial image with. So I'll run my application. Once the application is running, I will go to the database, and I will copy the file path that we have for the uploaded image, and the image exists in the images table as we just saw. So in the images table, we can see the uploaded image. So if I now come and copy the file path, which is pointing to the same URL as we have, which is the running application. So if I enter that, it now shows the image that was uploaded. So we can see that, after we have enabled that our API can serve of static files, only then we are able to get this image from our application. So with that change, we are able to upload images using our API, and we are uploading images to a local repository or a local file structure inside the API. So with that, the image